Well, thank you very much for having me with you. My gratitude more than anyone else is to our bishop who has welcomed me into the diocese, Father Martin, for the arrangements, and to Father Marco for our cybernetic friendship of quite a few occasions in which he, whilst I've been in different parts of the world, has invited me to give some talks on Zoom to some of his parishioners, which I've done very, very joyfully. As Father Martin just said, my father was English and he was Anglican. He married my mother in Spain in 1958, which was more or less like marrying the devil in Spain at that time. The poor man had to sign a document in the Chancery of Madrid, not understanding a word of Spanish, that his children would be raised in the Catholic Church. And so we, the three of us, I'm the eldest of three, we were born in London, but at a very early age we moved to Madrid, and that's where we grew up. At the age of 15 I entered the seminary of Toledo, and I was ordained very young at the age of 23, just at the end of the previous code of canon law, where the minimum age was 24, if I'm not mistaken. So I got a dispensation of a few months. The diocesan bishop could give you that, most especially because it was my great privilege to be ordained by Pope John Paul II during his first apostolic trip to Spain. It just happened that he came that year. It's a lovely anecdote because, as you may recall, those of us who are older, that someone tried to kill the Pope in May of 1981. The Pope was supposed to come in October of 81 to Spain for the 4th centenary of the death of Saint Teresa of Jesus. But due to the assassination attempt, the trip was postponed one whole year, which was my year of ordination. So I've always been very grateful to Ali Akka, who tried to kill the Pope and didn't succeed. Otherwise, he would have ordained a class before mine, which happens to be the class of my Archbishop. We were together in the seminary. He was a year ahead of me. Anyhow, just a little anecdote of almost 42 years of ordination. This was November 8th, 1982. I've spent 22 months in my own diocese. But it's not strange in my diocese. We've been blessed with an enormous amount of vocations. We have about 100 seminarians this year in the major seminary. And we are about 600 priests in the diocese. And the Holy See entrusted to our diocese a huge mission territory in Peru called Moyobamba, between the Andes and the Amazon River. So many, in fact, the bishop was not even in the seminary when I was ordained, and he was a priest of our diocese. He's now the priest of this, they call it a prelature, a mission territory in Peru. But there are many of us in the other parts of the world. We must be about 45 priests out of the diocese serving in other parts of the world. It may sound strange for a diocese where you receive many priests from other parts of the country, but I will always remind people who think this is an unusual situation that the Redemptoris Missio, you remember the famous encyclical of John Paul II, 1990, on the missionary work of the Church, number 67 speaks of diocesan priests serving in mission countries, which, who knows, maybe one day your diocese will be sending priests to other places, because you will be giving not of your overflow or your overabundance, but even from your poverty, even from your need, because it's a great, great grace and a great blessing for a diocese to have sent priests to the missions, in the same way as other dioceses are sending priests to you. Don't exclude that possibility. Always keep it in mind, because just thinking about it broadens your apostolic horizons and your spirituality. You think of the universal church. I remember as a seminarian, the cardinal at that time, he was the primate of Spain, the Archbishop of Toledo, for historical reasons, as the primate of Spain. Used to always remind us when we were seminarians, I have forbidden myself to think of my own diocese. It's one of the loveliest things I recall a bishop saying. Having said that, and forgive me for a very lengthy introduction, what I would like to say at this first evening that we come together is something that actually the bishop just mentioned. In fact, I thought he was like, they certainly have, bishops have a state of grace, because he was practically reading my notes for the opening statement, is the seriousness of life. I had an accident on January 28th with two religious sisters, and my car fell down the mountain. I won't bore you with gruesome photographs. I don't even know why I'm alive. I was on my way at 5 a.m., pitch dark in the mountains of Guerrero, with absolutely no electricity, nothing, and somebody was coming down the hill maybe a little too fast, and I swerved toward the edge of the precipice, and down we went. And it was going to be an ordinary day for me. One more day on a regular Sunday with 3 masses instead of 2 in very remote villages. And before I knew it, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I was in a clinic, and you won't even want to consider that a clinic, and a horrible little shack. And there was the bishop receiving these 2 religious and a priest who, were just at the threshold of death. The seriousness of life, the seriousness of the priesthood, the seriousness of our calling. I once remember being in a diocese where I was serving, and the Archbishop invited all the priests to come up to the sanctuary. There were many, hundreds of priests. It took us almost 20 minutes to all file behind the main altar to renew our priestly promises. And once we were all around him and behind him, he went to the edge of the sanctuary and faced the congregation. Then he turned around and looked at us, and he said, "If you were going to save this diocese," he told the people of God, "would you have chosen these men? If in this year of the Lord you were given a choice, who would be the men you would choose to save this diocese? Would you have chosen these individuals?" So, I don't know you, I didn't even know Father Marco until he introduced himself at the lobby. You are the men that God has chosen to save this diocese, to bring God's salvific grace to his people. Would you have chosen your brothers here in this room? Would you have chosen other people who you think would have done a better job? But for whatever the mysterious reasons of how each and every one of you arrived at this diocese, at this particular moment in church history, you are the men, you are the ones I have chosen. And that's something very serious. I am someone you chose to make yourself present in the lives of the people I have been sent to serve. And that's not to be taken lightly. It's a great honor, it's a great privilege, of which we will be one day accountable. We will be accountable for the grace that was placed in our hands, on our lips, in our hearts, to be spread to the people of God. The bishop, in the name of Jesus Christ, has sent me to serve. And it's so important because what is at stake, it's the eternal salvation of our brothers and sisters. That in the eyes of God, how many times we read these things in the Psalms, every life is so precious. For each one of them, he shed his blood on a cross. For each one of them, he remains in the Blessed Sacrament. For each one of them, he has instituted the sacraments. For each one of them, he carried his cross to Calvary and he endured the passion. It was for me. And we can all say it in the first person singular. It was for me. He did it for me. And it was for each one of those, the little people who have been entrusted to our care. And in this diocese, like in so many dioceses of this country, you have so many little people, so insignificant, who don't even legally exist in this country. People who live in your diocese, who are born, live, and die, and their existence is not recorded anywhere. And yet, they exist in the heart of God for all eternity. This is a retreat. And it's not a retreat just because Father Martin or the bishop or somebody sent an invitation or a reminder or whatever, or the annual calendar of activities of the diocese. I am here because Christ brought me here. He didn't bring me here just not another event in the annual diocesan calendar. That this is not like last year's retreat. And if it takes place, it's not like next year's retreat. And when I say if it takes place, maybe you have brother priests who passed away this year, and maybe their death was not expected. Did anybody tell them that last year's retreat was the last retreat? And if this was the last retreat, would I participate in all that's given to me during these days with greater seriousness? If this was my last opportunity, if this was my last chance? One of the great privileges of my life, the person who inspired me to be a missionary, it was my privilege to have known from the age of 18 and known very, very well Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I knew her for 20 years. I traveled with her. I was the first priest she took to Albania, to her home country. I was the first priest she took to the cemetery in Tirana, the capital of Albania, where her mother was buried, to which she had never been able to return from the day she left at the age of 18 and fanatic communism came to that part of the world. And she asked me if I would go, and funnily enough, the first retreat I ever gave, I was 27 years old, I'm 65, and she asked me if I would go to Yemen. I went to a place called Taiz, between Odeida and the capital, Sana'a. I preached this retreat to 6, 7 sisters there, surrounded by fanatic Muslims. I was shivering with fear. I had never given a retreat, didn't know what to say. I was the last person you would send to Yemen to preach a retreat to religious sisters living in such dangerous circumstances. A few months later, 2 of those sisters were executed by fanatic Muslims. I didn't know I was preaching the last retreat to those 2 sisters. I had no idea. Who could know? 2 young Indian sisters doing beautiful work, and their only crime was to be Catholic religious. That we have no idea. We live in a society, the US or Europe or whatever, where everything is so calculated. When I hear fathers saying, no, this is for 2025, I say, 2025? I don't know what's going to happen in my life in the next 2 weeks. But for you, all this kind of language is normal, and this is the way society is organized. But the reality, the truth, is that life doesn't unfold so much with such programs, all calculated, all programmed, pre-programmed, and pre-arranged. I mean, we have to organize our existence somehow. But I remember when I fell down the mountain, is one of the many things that I thought of in hospital is, how do I tell that poor priest in Utah that I'm not coming? And I thought about it. And I never said a word. I said, Lord, please give me the grace. This is my 3rd consecutive retreat. I finished a retreat in Mexico on Friday. I flew to Madrid Friday night. I arrived Saturday morning. Sunday I flew to New York. And today I fly here. Because I didn't want to disappoint those who had asked me to come, not because my word is worth very much, but because I had a commitment. I cannot move my right arm after this accident. I'm in a lot of pain. And this is not like, wow, no, this is life. This is how life happens. And that's how important it is, of the many opportunities that we have. The many opportunities we have. I was speaking with Father, the very back, the Marine, Chuck, telling me, we were 1,000 Marine in a battalion, we had no Catholic chaplain. Fathers, we have the tabernacle 3 feet away from our bedroom. Where I live, I am the parish priest of 87 villages in the mountains. I'm the first priest. It's not even a parish yet, it's just a mission territory in the diocese of Tlapa, T-L-A-P-A. You can Google it. It says it's the poorest diocese in Mexico, in the state of Guerrero. Its poverty, according to Google, is comparable to the poverty of South Sudan or sub-Saharan Africa. I drive 2-3 hours in the mountains to reach these tiny little villages. I don't have a square foot of asphalt or paved roads. I barely have electricity or running water. I was just sitting there under the shower just now. So, wow, hot water. What a strange feeling. Because when I shower, it's But and it's not so far away from here. So I think of all those people. I arrived there and maybe news of the Mass didn't reach, and I've driven 6-7 hours and nobody came to Mass. They worship animals. They slaughter goats and turkeys at the entrance of the church. The only thing they pray to is to the dead. They don't know who Jesus Christ is. They worship the saints, but it's as if they were gods. This is truly first evangelization. Fathers, they don't know anything about the Catholic faith. I can't refrain from sharing this anecdote. One of the first people I visited was one of the local stores there, where people go for their very, very basic shopping. And he said, you're the new priest. Eres el nuevo sacerdote. Wow, great. He said, I was arguing with some evangelicals, some Protestants, but I convinced them that the Catholic Church is the true church. I said, wow, great, well done. Well, how did you do it? He says, isn't it true, Father? I told them that we are, the Catholics, the true church, because we have the body is the cadaver of Jesus Christ in the Vatican. We have his body. How are we not going to be the true church? Who was I to say that we didn't? Of course we do. Tenemos el cuerpo de Jesucristo en el Vaticano. That's religion. And by the way, I'd like to say, if there are people who don't understand English clearly and they would like me to say a quick word in Spanish, si alguien no entiende bien lo que estoy diciendo y quiere que lo repita en español, una frase o lo que sea, lo hago con mucho gusto y seguro que a los hermanos no les importa. So, what I mean with this is, honestly speaking, the responsibility that we have before Jesus Christ, with all the graces, all that we know, all the opportunities, all the retreats, the wonderful people we've shared our priestly ministry with, how are we not going to have much more responsibility? Taking life seriously. So when we come to a retreat, I would really beg you on my bended knee, don't think that you came on your own initiative. Someone brought you here. I kept thinking on the airplane when I was coming here, why are you bringing me here? But I am sure the reason I was invited is not the reason that you have to bring me to this place, to Salt Lake City. Many times we go to places, we accept responsibilities, we take on assignments, and maybe the bishop or whoever is responsible has a particular reason in mind. But how many times has it not happened to all of us that God had very different reasons to bringing us to a place? or for a particular ministry. You have brought me here for a reason. There is something that this year, in this retreat, you want to say or you want to do in my life. Just, Mother Teresa used to say many times, give God permission. Give God the opportunity to do in your life something which maybe he has never done. Sometimes it's the realization of a particular situation in my life. Maybe it's the radical decision that I have to take to sever the ties to something or to someone or to a situation or to a reality or to something in my life that does not let me fly like an eagle. St. John of the Cross, speaking of the spiritual life, says that if you want the bird not to fly, you can tie its wings with a thick piece of wire or a very thin piece of thread. He asks, what is it easier to sever, the wire or the thread? And he will say, of course, it's much easier to sever the thread. And then he adds, but in the final analysis, as long as the wings of the eagle abound, whether wire or thread, it's not going to fly. How many of our parishioners are living in a complete state of mortal sin? Maybe we are not, thank God, in that situation. But there is that thread, that very thin piece of thread, which does not allow me to fly. I was called to fly like an eagle, and I'm just a chicken in the chicken coop, because I am not determined to cut. St. John of the Cross says in Spanish, por este camino de la vida espiritual se avanza más quitando que poniendo. On this journey of the spiritual life, you make much more progress doing away with than adding or doing anything extra or new in your spiritual life. Our responsibility is to rid ourselves from anything that does not allow me to grow in friendship with the person of Jesus Christ. And I assure you that you and I have been brought here because whatever the means, whatever the circumstances, he wants you and me to leave this retreat house much closer to him, in much greater friendship with the person of Jesus Christ. We will see during the coming talks how to grow. My advice, out of my own spiritual failures, don't make too many practical resolutions. Just an act of abandonment. I don't know, Lord, what you have to do with my life, but do whatever you have to do. But I want to learn to fly. I don't want to remain in where I am. Ultimately, our greatest danger is not even, it's terrible what I'm going to say, but experience has taught me this many years ago. It's not the occasional mortal sin, as horrible as it might be, but it's this state of mediocrity, this grey colour that hovers sometimes over a presbyterate or of a group of priests. It's that we're all more or less the same. We don't want to be different. We want to be like everybody else. We want to fit in. We say the same things. We dress the same way. We have the same customs. We laugh at the same jokes. It's this commonality. This is not what made Charles Luanga such an extraordinary layperson. Before my 2 years now in Mexico, I spent 15 years in Africa. I was for 12 years in Ethiopia, in the Somali region of Ogaden. I was the only Christian in the city of Gode, G-O-D-E. I was the nearest priest to the Indian Ocean, since there are no Catholic priests in Somalia. I was about 120 miles from the border with Somalia itself. This was the Somali region of Ethiopia. I lived alone for 7 years. I celebrated Mass alone for 7 years. This is first evangelization. The Apostolic Vicariate of Harar, which is the same size of Italy, and there were only 14 priests. The nearest Catholic priest to me was 450 miles. And every time I had to go to confession, I had to get on an airplane to the town of Jijiga. Sometimes I used to think, It's so expensive to go to confession, it's not worth sinning. When I used to celebrate Mass all by myself, the bishop didn't know if I'd celebrated Mass or prayed morning prayer or the office of readings or midday prayer or night prayer. He trusted me as your bishop trusts you. And when I gave the sign of peace, I would look. It was a tiny little room. I had rented this house, had no electricity, no running water, no toilet, no kitchen, nothing. And I would look out of the little window and say, peace with you, Ethiopia, peace with you, Somalia, for 7 years until others came to join me. And now there is a mission there, established there, where the faith is celebrated. When people ask me, but what are you doing there? They're all Muslims. But there was Christ in the tabernacle. And every time I left for confession or not confession, the last thing I did was remove the Blessed Sacrament from the tabernacle, since I didn't know what could happen to my house or if I would be allowed to return by the very fanatic Muslims. So when they asked me, why are you there? I kept saying, I am here so that he can be there. He's only there because I am here, only because of the priesthood. I will remain here so that he can remain in the tabernacle, in the Eucharist. So I invite you to take the retreat seriously. Forget about anything I may say. If it's helpful, fine. If not, I'm sure you have plenty of resources at this point in your own spiritual journey to think, to read, to pray, to reflect, to beg God on your bended knee. I have a very dear friend from my seminary days. He's now an archbishop in Spain. He left the seminary to become a Franciscan, and he's now an archbishop. And he always likes to say that God doesn't play with the happiness of those who don't play with his fidelity. And is it too much to ask that in the little time that we may be able to spend before the tabernacle is ask him, ask Jesus Christ what he thinks of you? Is he proud of you? Have I disappointed you? Because each one of us is called to be faithful. My responsibility is to be faithful. My happiness is his responsibility. But I promised you on the day of my ordination that I would be faithful unto you, faithful to you unto death. What has happened? Let us go back to that moment. Brothers in the priesthood, we all here have a history of salvation. We all have a geography of salvation. We know salvation history, the people of Israel. We too have that experience. And what's so beautiful is that as many priests as there are in this room this evening, there are so many unique and unrepeatable histories of salvation, the story of the life, of the vocation of each one of you. How Christ said your name, how Christ entered your life. The struggles, the joys, the surprise, the circumstances, everything that surrounded that very unforgettable moment. The moment in which we realized that I had heard someone say my name with a voice I had never heard, with a voice I have never forgotten. Now, the question is that none of us were ordained yesterday. What happened to that voice? Do I still hear that voice after those many years? Am I living of the fantasy of a voice I heard when I was a child, when I was a teenager, when I was an adolescent, when I was a young man, when I was whatever I was, but much younger than today, with much less knowledge of theology, spirituality, etc. Am I really paying the consequences of that fantasy? how did I end up here? So we have a history of salvation, those moments, those kairos, in which Christ has entered into my life and spoken to me. A voice that I heard, that I came knocking at the chancery, at the rectory of my parish, of the vocations office, whatever it is. I came because I had heard a voice. Maybe I was like the child Samuel. I didn't know that voice. And it was so beautiful how the church, maybe a vocations director, a confession, my parish priest, my parents, a youth group, where I learned to discern that voice. That it was not in my imagination. Because when someone's hearing voices, my friends, you are cuckoo, poor thing, he's hearing voices. It's a voice without a person. Am I here because I heard voices? Or because someone who is real, I have not seen with my eyes, touched with my hands, heard with my ears, and he's the only one who is real to me. Look at these priests here. Were they all next to you on the day of your ordination? We have some venerable fathers here with us. How many of these men were in the diocese when you became a priest? These are very new traveling companions in the priesthood. And how many of those traveling companions have gone home to God? The only one who has been with me, not even my parents, who has been with me from that very moment, was the one who called me by name. How many faces of how many bishops have we known? And with all due respect, this might not be the last one. Bishops come, bishops go, priests come, priests go. The only one who has remained, those of us who come from other countries, who has traveled the oceans, the mountains, the valleys, of the many places we have served the church, who's the only one who has always been with us? Who was with me in the deserts of Ogaden? If he was not real, was I talking to myself when I offered Mass? And when you pray, do you pray because you are talking to the wall? Do you pray because you're talking to a metal box where supposedly Christ is there in the Eucharist? Or when I come every morning to pray, it is because I am responding to someone's voice. That when I pray, and when we speak of prayer, we'll speak hopefully a little more abundantly on all of this, that when I pray, I am answering to someone's call every day, every morning. Or maybe that voice has been long forgotten. I do not even recognize it. Has it never happened to you that someone calls you on the phone and says, I bet you don't know who I am? Well, people want to play a funny prank. Keep speaking. The voice sounds familiar. Could that be happening to our vocation? Keep speaking. The voice sounds familiar. But it's such a long time since I don't even remember what that voice sounds like. The good thing of coming to a retreat and not knowing anyone, it gives you a lot of freedom to say a lot of things. And my experience having preached many retreats, is at first I used to think, no, I don't know what they're going to think of me. I better not say that. Maybe I'll keep that for a second retreat. But then I say, the chances are they're never going to invite me again. Let me say it. Just in case they never invite me ever again. But how important it is. And together with the history of salvation, I said we have a geography of salvation. It is not who called me or when, but also the where. Don't we remember the cathedral where we were ordained? The seminary days? The great events of our priesthood. That is my geography of salvation. We know the geography of salvation of the people of Israel. We know of Egypt, we know of Cana, we know of Mount Sinai, Mount Moriah. We know the many moments in the life of Jesus. Jesus had his geography of salvation. this particular family, this home, Mount Lazarus and Mount Tabor, or whatever it be. There is a geography of salvation, but there is also a geography of salvation, a personal one. Never forget that. It was here that he said my name. I was standing here when he said my name, when I realized. I remember when my father was sitting. The first person I ever told I wanted to be a priest was my father, who was a Protestant. He was so English, drinking a cup of tea and reading the Times. He did not even look at my face. He said, "Go and speak with your mother. She's Catholic." But he was the first person. One of the beautiful things is that after my ordination, my father became a Catholic, and I received him in the Catholic Church and gave him his first communion. How could I forget my father kneeling in front of me, reciting the creed of the Catholic faith? My younger brother was my father's godfather. It was very beautiful. But, those are the moments. That was the church in which he got married, the church where I celebrated my first Mass, where my sister got married. These are the special places that are woven into our vocation, into our salvific history. Give thanks to God. A retreat is a magnificent opportunity to say with tears in our eyes, "Thank you for calling me. Thank you for calling me to belong to this presbyterate. Thank you for my brother priests. Thank you for their vocation." Isn't it a miracle that we are still priests? Have we not met so many of our brother priests who have left the priesthood? Did they join the priesthood only to leave 3, 4, 10 years later? And I am still here. But isn't this extraordinary? Again, I am a part of this group of men whom Christ has chosen to save Salt Lake City. You are the ones that I have chosen. I have prayed for you, Jesus says. I don't only pray for you, but for those who will believe. John chapter 17, his priestly prayer. So, don't make too many promises, just acts of hope. And ultimately, finally, just to conclude this first session, I don't know if it's offensive to ask ourselves, or to ask you to ask yourselves, how much do we love Jesus Christ? Can I humbly say today, that I don't know if I love Jesus a lot or very little, but I can say that, Lord, I have never loved you as much as I love you today. What would a bishop want but to see his priests grow in that love of Jesus, to truly believe how precious you and I are in his eyes. The love with which Christ said my name, as no one has ever pronounced my name. Have I experienced that love of Jesus Christ? We can live in this, and we will speak about this, especially tomorrow, when we speak of our spousal union with Jesus Christ. We can be single. We can live the priesthood as if we were single, as if we were married, as if we were separated, as if we were divorced, or as if we were widows. We're still priests. We still function. We go through the motions. We preach the word of God. We fulfill our duties. But a good, decent mercenary, forgive the strong language, can do the same. Except he works for pay. He does the job, but he's an employee of a multinational called the Catholic Church. I am single. I think like a single person. I behave like someone who's single. We all have brothers and sisters who are married. Do you remember how they changed after marriage? Their behavior? just the way they interacted with other people. They didn't spend 6 years in a seminary. Nobody gave them the book of rules of how to behave in marriage. It's amazing how little training or formation we give to married couples and then ask them to remain faithful to their last breath until death do us apart. But it's so beautiful to see how their lives unconsciously change. Their behavior changes. Their hearts belong to someone else and not to themselves. The single person may love Jesus and may love a lot of people, but her heart belongs to themselves. Married person is, to whom does the undivided part of your heart belong? That when you give it, you have given yourself completely. I cannot love anything or anyone as I love him to whom I have given the undivided part of my heart. With a biblical passage, the treasure of great value, the one who sells everything, not just money, not just your bank account, everything. Peter will say to Jesus, Lord, we who have left everything. What defines this spousal union with Jesus Christ is we who have left everything, that all I have is you. You are the only one I have. To you only my heart belongs. Or we are separated. We're still priests. We still wear the collar. We still celebrate Mass. Why are we together? Because of the children. Because of the people. Christ and I begin to skip my prayer. I haven't been to confession in a long time. My friendship with Christ, it's become so cold. Nothing to do when I was a seminarian, or 3 days after my ordination, where I was living, floating on a cloud, my first Mass. Ooh, who remembers all of that? Why are we together? Why am I still a priest? Well, Father, at my age, people say that. Where am I going to go? I spend my life talking to priests at a very personal level. I have hundreds of retreats to religious. Father, where am I going to go at my age? If I had known, I would have never been here. Some of the most terrible things that someone can say, and you function in the priesthood. We are together. We are apart. We live under the same roof. We are together because of the children, the people. We go through the motions. And we might even be very honest, hard-working people. The bishop doesn't see your heart. My brother priest doesn't see my heart. But Christ and I are not so together. And then it just gets worse, divorced, when we formalize. But when you formalize, you don't get up in the morning saying, I am the happiest priest in the world, I'm going to leave the priesthood. No. Things begin to die gradually. I stop taking care of my spiritual life. I begin to neglect my spiritual duties. It's funny because I dispense to people what I don't dispense to myself. We can expose the Blessed Sacrament so that the people of the parish go to adoration. And then I go out, God knows where, and then I come down to give benediction. And it's the people who spent the hour in the church because I'm so busy. One very simple question that we can ask ourselves is, do I pray more as a priest or less than when I was a seminarian? It's not possible that I was closer to Christ when I was a seminarian than after all these years where he and I have loved each other so much. So brethren, this is a very powerful call. I've come from very far away. Brothers, I have not come to entertain you, just to share the seriousness of what we have in our hands. Because other people, my poor Mixteco Indians, they might not know the difference between the Apostle James, the dead, Jesus Christ, or the body, the cadaver in the Vatican. But what am I going to say at the end of my life? Could I possibly say that I didn't know? No, you did know. We are the ones, St. John, first letter of John, who have known the love of Jesus Christ, have known the love of Jesus Christ and have believed in it. When the bishop enters into dialogue, I don't know, you don't have a seminary, I don't know if it's the vicar general or the whoever, no, who represents the seminarians, doesn't matter. Do you know if they are worthy? No. What's he asking? Did they rob a bank? Do they have children on the side? No. He's asking so much more. What he's asking is, do you guarantee the church? Are you helping me, the bishop, guarantee the people of God that I am going to send to their parish someone who knows the love of Jesus Christ? That's what he's asking the formators or those who are responsible to present the candidates. You assure me that I am going to send this man to this particular mission, and he knows Jesus Christ. The parishioners, don't they come to us and say, Father, please pray for me, you who are much closer to God? Don't the people believe that we are much closer to God than them? And when you look out at your congregation on a Sunday morning and you wonder, I wonder who in this church is closest to God. But it might not be me. So I think we owe it to the people of God that we know Jesus Christ, that we know the shepherd, that we've known his love, that when we speak of the love of Jesus Christ, we are speaking in the first person singular of our own personal experience. I know that this love is real, that it has given meaning to my life, that this love has been faithful to me every day of my existence, and no matter how unfaithful, my infidelity to Christ has never justified his infidelity to me. How beautifully it is described in the prophets and in the experience of Israel. Brethren, we are at different stages in the spiritual life, but we all have our many Egypts. A retreat is a magnificent opportunity. We've just celebrated Pentecost, and we've celebrated two of the most beautiful theological feasts, Holy Trinity and Corpus Christi. Brothers, what is my Egypt at this particular moment? He's bringing me out of Egypt. I might be frightened. I might not think I have the strength to journey through the days and days and days of endless desert, thinking that maybe the promised land is a fiction of my imagination. But if I trust in him, he will say my name again, and we will leave the many slaveries of Egypt. Remember, there was a youth encounter in the early 90s in my diocese in Toledo, and I loved the logo, the catchphrase that they had chosen. ¿De qué te sirve la Pascua si sigues enamorado de tus cadenas? What good is Holy Week, Easter? What good is the Paschal mystery to you if you're still in love with your chains? What good is the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which we didn't celebrate that long ago, if I'm still going to continue bound in my own chains? How sad, brothers, that we have severed so much wire, and we only have some few little pieces of thread remaining to sever. The tragedy is that we might never sever them. The good news is that he's calling us to fly like an eagle and to sever those little pieces of thread which keep me bound in chains. And it all depends on my decision, on my bended knee in that chapel during this retreat, witnessed by my brothers in the presbyterate and accompanied by my bishop. What a great opportunity to say, Lord Jesus, from this moment ever, never again, I want to fly.